Hey everyone, and welcome back to another week of cool astrology at Haunted Cerebral. I hope everyone's been doing well, and that this past week was not too much of an emotional, intense, or weird time. So yeah, I just want to thank everyone always for supporting me, continuing to check out the things that I'm doing, and supporting this channel, supporting the work I'm doing. And if you want to book a reading with me, book a consultation with me, links are in the description box. If you're on Instagram, you can just shoot me a DM. But yeah, liking, commenting, subscribing, everything goes a really long way. So just wanted to say thanks to everyone who's been so supportive so far. So let's kind of just get right into it. I'm going to share the screen here so we can see what's going on. So as we can see, as we can see that this week, it's kind of Monday. Actually, today is kind of the intense period in a way. It's like, I don't know if anyone else has noticed, but today has been a bit off. But mostly this week is kind of just like business as usual. The main things happening are some ingresses into Gemini. Those are kind of going to shift a lot of the energy. I'll break that down more later, but that's kind of the week in general, really just leading up to next week when some pretty major things go down. So let's start getting into the real time, and then we can keep this going. All right, hold on. I just want to change to this screen. All right. So let's move this on. All right, where am I on my kind of gotten lost in my notes here. And I'll move this back to the beginning of the week. So already today in Berlin, so again, if you're watching this channel from anywhere else in the world, just adjust your times because I'm doing it from Berlin, Germany. So just adjust your times and location, and then you should still be able to follow on how things go. So let's start with Monday, 3rd of May, which is today. So the moon's been in Aquarius now since last night. And I don't know about anyone else, but really it's just been kind of like an emotional hangover, I think, this morning, as well as like this weekend in general, especially since the full moon last week. Yeah, and just a lot was going on. I don't know if anybody else said that, but like there was a lot of expectations, maybe suspicions about things. There's just emotional intensities in general, perhaps some kind of like covert weirdness on some level. I know for a fact that it was probably pretty cleansing on some level. It's like maybe something we expected something wrong to happen. It didn't, or maybe we just needed to let out some of that emotional depth that we were feeling and just get it out of ourselves and feel a bit of purging from that. So, but overall, I think it was just like kind of a weird week. But this week, and kind of May in general, the whole month of May, this is really kind of like the start to the rest of the year. Kind of like basically the first quarter of 2021 was kind of like the dress rehearsal a little bit for a lot of big changes happening soon, but or at least in general, especially with the Great Conjunction in Aquarius that would have ended off last year. But like 2021 is kind of like getting us ready for 2022, especially because you can see here that Jupiter is actually getting ready to move into Pisces by next week. So in a way, like even this week is kind of this getting us ready for next week as well. So yeah, so we kind of like opened up today here. I'm going to move the clock back here too. The day kind of opened up with this sextile to Venus from Neptune. So although we may be getting some really like good rest, maybe we got the rest that we needed, or there was just a bit more restfulness last night in general. It may be that like things are a bit too lost in the clouds waking up. There might have been a little bit of difficulty of getting ourselves going. We may have just been enjoying that kind of like that kind of lull from the full moon and just wanting to kind of stay in that little like pleasure zone. So in general, I think to today, like things really starting off are not like exactly going to plan. Maybe we may be feeling like things are going to be in this more kind of things will go smoothly, but right away, I think things are just like not really going to be going to plan according to plan. So, and there's just a lot going on today in general. So the overall vibe, I think today is just this kind of like delays and fantasies kind of combined. We may like want to be communicating something as well. Like basically, if we hold on, going forward, Mercury moved into this exact square with Jupiter, right? So this is just bringing up more of this Aquarian, Taurus tensions that have been building up through the year anyway. The moon's also going to move into squares with everything in Taurus later in the day as well. So it's like with that Mercury Jupiter tension that like things are just off in general, like things are not on the same page. Things are kind of working against each other on some level. You know, maybe what you're saying is kind of going against what others are believing or attaching themselves to on some level. And maybe what we're trying to work towards, what we're trying to communicate for, and maybe the messages that we're sending out right now are not really aligning properly. Like the pieces of the puzzle are not matching up, and maybe we're kind of like forcing them together. So on some level, there's like an urgency to like get the things done and to get back onto track, to make these things happen. Maybe to like, for instance, for me, this whole morning, I spent the whole like morning just trying to contact a doctor or something to get the COVID vaccine, and like everything's just backed up. All the answers I got, I think I called like 30 numbers, and it's like every number, they're just the same answer. It's like there's no possibility for appointment, and you're gonna have to try back at the end of the month kind of thing. So it was like right away, I could tell like today is like, there's a lot of belief about what we're gonna do and desire to get to do that thing, but then all the communications that we're trying to make are not lining up properly. So on some level, there's this like urgency to communicate something, to connect with things, to make those messages happen, and to make those currencies and exchanges happen, but they're just not there yet on some level. So our thinking and our beliefs are on kind of these different pages. Like for instance, I also got this like messages from my brother just saying like, oh, you should check on the cryptocurrency you invested in back in 2018, because it's all like all the numbers are up right now. And I'm just looking at it now, and it's like, it's just not there. It's like, it's just because at the time there was that big trend, and you know, when you fall into it, it's like the numbers were so low, and now I don't know, that was just my experience with crypto, and that's why I didn't get into the whole new trend that's going on now, because it's too much of a gamble. And I think this is one of those things where it's like you could potentially take that gamble, but then you're like kind of forcing it because you think it's the right thing to do, but it's like off. So yeah, so the moon's still in Aquarius, and there is just this overall feeling of like the potentiality of things, the future of things, the progress we're making, and where we want to see that progress go, and kind of like overall realizations that we're making. But yeah, so like right in the middle of the day here in Berlin, Germany, the Mercury just squares with Jupiter. So it goes into this exact square with Jupiter. So it's like I was saying, it's like something we're saying is just not matching up right now with what's going on. We have this faith and belief that things are going to go according to plan, according to the progressions that we're on, but then we hit the snags and things just like get delayed. So this is kind of like happening not long before Mercury actually even changes signs too, so increasing in dignity. But basically like the flavors of our thinking, flavors of our thinking as Mercury is moving on, perhaps we're like feeling good about how those things are going on, that it's still in Taurus, you know, it's got this Venetian vibe to it, but perhaps they're also not. And it may be that like we've been kind of like sitting on some thinking that we've had, you know, being in this solid sign of this Venetian solid sign. We've been maybe thinking, sitting on our thinking, and just like assuming a lot of things, that things are going to work out according to plan if we just let them happen. But maybe at this point, it's like once we started to kind of take some action on it, maybe it's not happening. You know, as Mercury reaches that anaretic degree, there's a bit of urgency. So this is like there's, in a way, there's like this will to get this message across, to get this connection made, but it's like also really feeling forced. There's like this, and it's not coming out smoothly, and there's the potential for things to get misunderstood on some level. But like once Mercury does shift dignity, there is this greater flexibility. And we begin to kind of figure out where our position is in the conversation and in the messages we're making with others, and maybe with ourselves as well, the message we want to send out, because like our thinking starts to get more clear, and there is this like increase in the fluidity of our potential for socializing and conversations and things like that. It's definitely like a chatty transition. So yeah, this time though, like today, it's very much like we're figuring out what the answers are going to be later on. And in some levels, it's like maybe we're figuring out what the comebacks we wanted to make for tricky conversations in the past were or are now. But it's like kind of like a little bit too late on some level. It's like we waited too long to make the connection happen. So it's like, for instance, for me, it's like maybe if I had, if I had pushed a little bit harder a week or 2 weeks ago, I wouldn't be having my expectations not met now on some level. So hopefully, most of us have learned something out of this, like delays and this mixing up of the messages on some level, that we can kind of take forward and like improve upon, especially once Mercury moves into Gemini, and we'll have a little bit more of that social fluidity. So yeah, and then later in the day, it's like another kind of square day, and basically the sun will perfect that square to basically within the same hour. You can see it here. The sun actually perfects the square with Saturn. So like literally within the hour of the two, at 13 degrees, 11 minutes, 12 minutes kind of thing. So yeah, sun squaring with Saturn as well that today. So basically, right in the middle of the day, these two things hit. And it's just bringing up again these tensions between this Taurus areas of our lives and these Aquarian areas of our lives. So, wherever you have Taurus and Aquarius in your chart, these are kind of the tensions that are being brought up again. The sun is kind of like bringing that story, the focus of that story now from our Taurus side of things. So for instance, for me, it's in the creative house, and Saturn's in my money house. So there's this kind of like tension, and things are just off between where the money is and where the things I want to create and the ideals of my creative endeavors are off on some level. So just look at where it is in your chart, and you can like see where those kinds of tensions are coming up, and kind of ask yourself, like, how are these manifesting for you? And maybe they'll become a little bit more clear now, especially as the sun, sun's all about clarity. It's all about becoming more things moving into that focus and that consciousness, the kind of the spirit of the flavor of that, that part of the life. So the story is just getting some, and it's also like the story, right? So it's like right now the story's getting some delays, and maybe the directions and ambitions we have are getting pulled back a bit. On some level, we have to get more realistic on our perspectives in general. Maybe on some level, our reputations are not really where we want them to be yet, and they have to be kind of brought back to somewhere more realistic. Unfortunately, with every kind of transit with Saturn, especially an overcoming square to Saturn, there's going to be some coldness to this. And like this, the warmth of the sun, the radiance of the sun that wants to kind of shine forth. And what's interesting too is like today here in Germany, it's like, okay, we're supposed to be like, already in May into spring, but today it's already kind of cold today. It already feels a bit like late winter on some level. So there's just a coldness to this. The warmth of the sun, like I said, it's being oppressed by the coldness of Saturn. So yeah, the sun's just separating from the engagement with Uranus too. We can see that it's just coming out of that separating adherence with Uranus. So we really are also seeing things differently too. Maybe whatever area of life we have that Taurus part of our lives, we're seeing things differently in general. But like Saturn is basically saying, like, listen, just because you see things differently now doesn't mean that they are different yet. And so it's kind of like we have to, what kind of new things have we learned in the last week as well? Like maybe last week was a weird period, maybe the last 2 weeks in general, as since the sun has been in Taurus, maybe the last 2 weeks building up to that conjunction with Uranus, what kind of new things have we learned, and what kind of new tools do we have to kind of get ready for that difference that can come later, as long as we take the actions in order to do it. We have to kind of do it. And Saturn's basically saying, sure, you can take actions to do it, but don't expect like big impacts. It's all about one thing at a time. And what are the rules that are like in place right now? And what rules are not working? What kind of parts of your plan that you set in motion are not working, and which ones need to be broken? What rules need to be broken? Which parts of your plan need to be looked at a bit differently? So maybe on some level we have some leverage on that. We're able to kind of see those things now, but like things may have to change. And so we have to kind of make a decision, because now the game's starting to get a bit more serious. This early part of the year, maybe there's been a bit more not flexibility, but a bit more like we don't have to take the necessary actions yet. And now that Saturn is squaring with the sun, it's like, okay, now the actions that we do next, these are more necessary actions. So we can't ignore it anymore. So yeah, it's like basically made to make a decision, because the game is getting serious. And if you want to keep playing, you gotta like do these things in order to move forward. So then the moon, as it's getting moving into the adherence with Saturn, it also squares with Uranus there, basically around middle afternoon, actually right now. So the moon is like squaring with Uranus too, and this kind of ungrounds things. Forces some rebelliousness on some level. Maybe we want to do things differently. Maybe we don't even want to do the things we want, that we've set ourselves out to do. But like at the same time, we kind of have to do them in order to be free of them on some level. The moon's getting closer to that adherence. It's now within a 3-degree range of conjoining with Saturn. So things are starting to turn more serious. And things are starting also to turn a little bit more stable too. It's like on one level, maybe we're at that point too, where it's like we've kind of gone far enough where our routines or our patterns of behavior and our patterns of working things out right now have gotten to a point where like, okay, now they're in a more stable place, but we also are realizing that some things are not working. And some of the things of our expectations are kind of not really being met, and so there's an impermanence to some of our plans, and we have to kind of like adjust those for making certain to kind of make our expectations become more realistic on some level. So kind of like we need to kind of in some way contemplate what's coming next. When it seems like there's not much solid ground, sometimes we just got to go back to the drawing board and put everything in front of us again. So it could be a good time to apply some pressure onto some of our goals, maybe not get immediate results out of the actions we take, but at least we're learning something new. Like I said, with the whole Sun square Saturn, I think this is just emphasizing that, the moon is always going to be triggering things. So the fact that the moon is moving into this conjunction with Saturn, it's just, for me, I think it's like emphasizing the square to the sun. So really it's like the dress rehearsal's over and now it's game time kind of thing. So that's kind of the last thing that happens on Monday. So I'm going to actually move us into Tuesday. So Tuesday morning, Mercury moves into Gemini. So this is kind of like one of the major energy shifts. And we're going to see kind of in the next weeks, a lot of shifts. And actually even this week, 2 major shifts from the solid signs or the fixed signs into double-bodied or what's called mutable signs. And this could be a nice shift, actually, because now things are a little bit more flexible. Delays might be, the delays might no longer be the norm. It might not just be about, okay, well, I'll wait till next week or I'll do it tomorrow or blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, it's like maybe today we can do more. Maybe today we do a bit less. We have to be a bit more flexible with how things are going. And with Mercury, it's all about, what we're thinking, what we're communicating, the commerce, the trades that we're making, the deals that we're having, things like this. So, there is some messy moments in general, but just get some of that water in me. Yeah, it's like a vitamin water, in case you're wondering. But yeah, I mean, I think from here on out, there is some flexibility, like I said, but in some ways, it's like right now is the best time for a lot of this too, because Mercury is going to get ready to retrograde at the end of the month. So right now it's like the flexibilities that we can get in touch with now, these are going to be really stimulating. These are going to be really free flowing and free moving. And we should be seeing how more communications and shifts in the markets and technologies and such are starting to take form and how they're going to be applied to our everyday life. And this is especially shaping the next chapter for next year too, because shortly into like next week, Jupiter moves into Pisces, and that really like increases the amount of double-bodied energy into the coming months. So yeah, Mercury is in domicile now. Venus is going to be in domicile now, and Saturn's also in domicile now. So it really is a good exchange of dignified planets. There's a lot of good energy right now to work with. Thinking is clear, feelings are grounded, and there's like a plan in order, a plan that we're following. And another thing I think it's important to point out is that Mercury has actually moved out from under the beams of the sun. So within that 15-degree range, when planets are under the beams of the sun, they're kind of debilitated. But Mercury has not only moved 15 degrees away from the sun, I think actually quite a bit more now, but actually has even shifted signs. So now there's not only that degree range between the sun and Mercury, but there's also a whole sign barrier. So Mercury can actually now be seen just after the sun sets on the western horizon. So if you want to see Mercury, just go out during sunset and look to the western horizon, and as soon as the sun sets, you'll be able to see Mercury. So this is kind of an intensifying moment for mercurial matters, but Mercury is also in its receptive evening star phase. So this the first start, like I said, the first start of Mercury's phase coming out of being under the beams of the sun, it's in its heliacal evening phase, and that it's a much better in the first part of that than the second part, because once Mercury stations and moves to go retrograde, that's when things start to get a bit more complicated. So right now, actually, it's going to be a good time to look into money matters, to try and connect with messages that we want to read or to learn something from. So it's also a good time to get good responses from things as well, and to follow up on messages and see what kind of messages are coming out into the open, and to kind of like wait on the results that we want to get. In a weird way, that kind of like, maybe that doesn't make sense, but it's like a good time where like, we're doing actions already, results aren't there yet, but now we can kind of like not be so obsessed with waiting for those results. We can kind of like focus our attentions on other things while the results are coming in. Mercury is now also moving towards its furthest elongation from the sun, and it will retrograde on May 30th, 2021. This will be the second retrograde of the year, which are all in air signs. So, like I said, right now is the best time to use that mercurial energy before the retrograde takes place. Mercury was really only in Taurus for a couple of weeks as well, but is going to be in Gemini for a really long time, like basically until July 11th. So it's a long time for Mercury because Mercury moves quite quickly, doesn't really stay in signs for very long. But in this case, it's going to be in the sign that it actually rules for quite a long period of time. It'll be there during the eclipse season. It'll be there once Jupiter goes into Pisces. It'll also be there once Saturn retrogrades and then re-engages with that Saturn-Uranus square that's been kind of flavoring the whole year. So right now is really the best time actually to use that mercurial energy. If you're going to make trades, now's the good time. If you're going to send out a message, now's the good time. If you want to make a new deal with something, if you want to start to write something and deal with taxes and things like that, it's like now's the good time. Venus, unfortunately, is still under the beams, but we'll see later in the week that Venus is going to actually move into Gemini. And once it does, like maybe Venus will still be technically under the beams, but there'll be that sign barrier between them. So the energy is different. There's a different flavor to what Venus is getting its pleasure from, its stimulation from. So moving forward in the day, though, the moon moves into a square with Venus. So right there. So the moon's now square with Venus. Later in the afternoon, the evening. And, you know, it's not always the best option for planetary connections on some level, like squares in general. They're not always the best thing. They're kind of forceful. They're a little bit hostile, but at least there's a conversation happening between the moon and Venus, because there hasn't been one since the moon moved into Aquarius. So it could be a tricky time for relationships, really. If we're in new relationships, or we're trying to make new conversations with new relationships happen, or if we're trying to deal with something more complicated in a relationship, it could be like that. It's not the best option for that, but it's also, it's like it's better sooner than later, so to speak. That's the kind of vibe it is. It could be also a good chance to get back onto the same page in relationships if they've been off a little bit the last day or two. And the moon doesn't really stay here for long, because actually the moon's actually moving into this nice conjunction with Jupiter later in the evening, basically tomorrow morning. So like, even though this may be like a tricky conversation that needs to be had, it's like, because it's a necessary conversation to have, and maybe it comes out forceful. It doesn't, you stumble on your words or whatever, but at least like it happens, and moving forward from that, there's a bit more of optimism to look forward to. And it's going to be adhering to it. So that's like actually a bonification to the moon. And so in this case, it's like honesty is the best policy in this case. And this is a pretty good situation for relationships, I think, in general, in order to push that story forward, in order to feel a little bit more optimistic about them in general. There's more to come in the story, but right now we can like know that it is, but we don't have to do more than what was already necessary to get back onto the same page, because there's going to be a lot more positivity. There's a lot more potential for growth. And optimistic feelings will remain as we like go into the night. Like maybe we can at least go to bed knowing that things are going to be okay. So that's it for Tuesday. Let's move on to Wednesday, though. So literally like in the middle of the night on Wednesday, that's when the moon actually makes that conjunction with Jupiter. So we kind of like wake up with a good feeling, like something's been improved on some level. Though there may have been a forcefulness to getting it improvement that we want. It's like because of that, we have a bit more of a sense that the future will be a nice place for us. But basically, after the moon does make that conjunction with Jupiter, then like in the middle of the night, and so this is kind of, it's like carrying over that flavor, and then it goes into Jupiter's sign, but it changes signs in the middle of the night. So really, we kind of wake up with that shift into Pisces, and maybe we just get a little bit too cloudy, a little bit too caught up in the fantasy of things, a little bit dreamy, and kind of like losing sight of reality a little bit. But basically, as soon as the moon moves into Pisces, and then in the morning, probably when people are actually waking up and getting breakfast or whatever, it moves into a square with Mercury. So, things are, then again, they're just like kind of off maybe on some level. This is not off. I've heard it often. It's said that when the moon is squaring with Mercury, it's not really a good time to communicate. It's not really a good time to send out a message. It's not always a good time to do things. But because it's in a Jupiter sign, it's like there is that it's carrying over whatever flavors it had from the conjunction there. So there's a potential in some level to turn good feelings into a difficult day for communications. It's like one of those days where you wake up and everything's like feeling really good, but then like mishap after mishap kind of goes on, especially in the way that you're conversing with others, and it just kind of like deteriorates that on some level. And we may just not even want to say much in general. Or on the flip end, it may seem that like whatever comes out of us is just working out on some level. So on one side, it could be this forceful and emotional release of our thoughts, our concerns. But on the other level, it's like the circumstances of it seem to like work out properly on some level. It's kind of a weird one. I mean, with the moon being in Pisces, it's not really going to feel totally clear. So it could be a good time if you are feeling really unclear, just to make lists, get back to basics, and kind of put the whole like situation out in front of us in order for us to like see what it is about that thing, that either to realize like, why are we so attracted to it, or why are we thinking about it so much? Why is it so stimulating, or why does it take us to this kind of darker place? So, the best thing to do when there's like some kind of a secret that's festering in the dark and maybe we don't understand it fully, is to bring it out into awareness, to shed some light on it, and then we can like start to get some relief about that. So yeah, basically that's kind of flavoring most of the day. But then the moon moves into this nice trine with Mars. So even though Mars is kind of in a funny place there, it's like somehow, because since that Scorpio full moon, it's like we know where our emotions stand right now. And just a general awareness about our emotional fragility and sensitivities in general is kind of here as well. So we kind of like know where our soft spots are. We know where our hard parts are. We also know what things are kind of triggering us. So we can kind of be a bit more loose. We can be a bit more gentle with ourselves on terms of our impulsivities and our kind of crabbiness. So, it's like kind of like not really taking things the wrong way. It's like, even though, because we know already how we take things the wrong way. And so in a way, it's like, if something kind of normally that does trigger us, because we're more aware of it, we're like, oh, well, maybe that's just this thing that like bothers me sometimes, and not make a big deal out of it. So it's kind of like our emotional patterns are just a bit more clear. And we're able to like give ourselves some rest when we need it, and we can kind of reground ourselves and get a better perspective as we need it. So there is this kind of powerful sympathetic approach to our more crabby selves in our lives in general. With the moon in Pisces, there's a lot more room, and like I said, it's carrying over still a bit of that flavor from Jupiter, with that conjunction with Jupiter. It's in a Jupiter sign. So there's just a bit more spaciousness right now. There's a big pool of possibilities. So with that in mind, it's like, since Mars is in a moon sign, there's this connection between them, right? And so on a level, there's like, Mars is like in this crabby Cancerian sign, and it can just at least trust that there is space to be crabby. There's space to be a bit insecure. There's space to be a bit of a baby if we need to be. And we can just withdraw if we not need to as well. There's space for that as well. So in general, it's like just having that kind of safety of knowing that there's enough space, that if we want to be overbearing, we can be, and that we can, since we're a bit more conscious of our emotional fragility, we can know that, like, you know, maybe being impulsive right now is not the best option, even though there's that sensitivity that's kind of being brought up. And it's just, I think in general, it's like finding a safe space, right? So that's kind of Wednesday. That's kind of the last thing that takes place on Wednesday. So we can kind of move forward into Thursday. So first thing that takes place on Thursday morning, basically in the middle of the night, is that sextile to Uranus. And that kind of like, it's kind of like a bit of a weird day too, because like in the middle of the night, there's that kind of like weird connection to Uranus, that weird connection to the groundedness and to the sensual pleasures that we're having right now in this whole Taurean thing. But then the moon's also just kind of getting closer to Neptune as it's like building up to that conjunction with Neptune. And that kind of is like flavoring the day. So it is kind of a weird day. We kind of have to like learn how to ride the waves right now. Another thing I think it's important to point out is that this is like where the moon is at the halfway point between the nodes. And it's said that when, I think, you know, if you think about what was going on after the full moon, there was just this kind of like emotional crash a bit, especially like a bit of a lull, especially as the moon conjoined with the south node last week. And at this halfway point, it's going from the low of the south node to the high of the north node. So it's at this point right now where it's like getting on the shift to move back up towards the north node. So right now it's kind of like we need to be able to ride a wave. There is a potential for like a kind of psychedelicness to happen, a kind of a trippy wave on some level. So it's also like being at this point now where we're kind of like done with all the delusions and the fantasies of the moment. Maybe we're a bit like done of like waiting for things to happen. We're a bit done of just things like of just wanting to feel good right now. We want to start to do things about it. But we're kind of like at that point in the night on some level where it's like, okay, I've done all the things I wanted to do with this evening or this party or this trip I'm having, and now I'd like to kind of get out of that, but we kind of can't yet. We still have to like kind of go for the next 6 hours of this trip. So it's probably going to feel good on some level. It's not that we're not going to have like a good time, but there is just like a lot kind of going on, and it's kind of like questioning like when is this ride going to stop? So yeah, and I think with the moon being at that halfway point, it's like it's kind of a drag right now. It's kind of like having spent all this time on the couch up until this point, and then now we have to like get up and finish a project that's really like due, because it's like once the moon reaches that north node, it's like that's when we have to really that's where the work that we're doing now can actually be put into action. But we're at this point where we're just like don't really want to do the work. So yeah, it's a bit of a weird day, but basically leading up to that conjunction with Neptune, Venus forms a perfect trine to Pluto. So it's kind of an interesting combination. I mean, I'm not going to go too into it. Like basically all I can say is like the Pluto transits continue. So on some level, it's going to be a bit of a weird one. It's like it could be like feeling good from pain or getting pleasure from seeing the horrors, or on some level, just getting some more lust from that more kind of darker temptations, so that darker tempestuous possibilities of our psyche on some level. Maybe it doesn't happen for us on a psychological level. Maybe it's something out in the world. Maybe there's just a bit more of a darker flavor and it kind of like feels good on some level. So on some level, it's like, are we going to wet our mouths as we get hungry for this kind of revenge? This could be like a revenge feel to it. It's like, you know what they say, it's like, are we someone who's hungry for revenge? I'm finishing this fantasy series right now, and there's a character in it who Basically, if you haven't read it, it's called the First Law trilogy, and there's a character in it who's just like totally bent on getting revenge, completely bent on it, and like that's all they have hunger for, and they get all their they get all their pleasure from doing things. All the actions they take are all these like pleasurable ones that lead them closer to the revenge that they're so hungry for. So on some level, I think this like has that kind of vibe, this trine between Pluto and Venus. And I think it's like important to be like, okay, are we going to fulfill that hunger for revenge on some level? Because maybe it also feels good because then we have the power of this like darker appetites being met, but it also has this like potential for extremes, right? So yeah, kind of, this is kind of also carried on to the next day, but I just wanted to point it out. And also that kind of moving on into the day, you know, the moon moves into that conjunction with Neptune. So kind of that buildup of that wave I was talking about kind of goes on through the day. And by the end of the night, we're kind of like, all right, I'm ready to kind of get out of this Pisces zone. I'm ready to kind of like do something a bit more real again. So yeah, okay, let's just move on into Friday, May 7th. All right. So the moon then moves into a sextile in the morning with Pluto as well as with Venus, and kind of just re-emphasizes some of the things I was talking about there with this kind of Pluto intensity. It's kind of carrying it on into the morning. So it's kind of like staying out all night after a really long binge night, and like the solution to that feeling in the morning is like, oh, maybe rather than like, okay, I'm gonna go home and take a cold shower and eat some food and blah 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 and then go to work, it's like, no, the best solution right now is to just keep on partying or something like that. So that's the kind of vibe it is a little bit. It's like, yeah, clearly the smart or the best solution is to just like keep going, skip breakfast kind of thing. So that's kind of the vibe I get from that. And then the moon basically moves through that into the afternoon, and then it's going to move into Aries. So it's another energy shift. The moon's now moving into Aries as well as getting ready to square with Mars. So now again, the moon and Mars are in this mutual reception again. And this is going to go on through all of Mars's transit through Cancer. It's like every time the moon goes into these Mars signs, it's going to kind of like bring back up some of the things that were going on during the Scorpio full moon from last week. So yeah, it's bringing back some of that intensity, but now it's a bit more active. It's a bit more aggressive. It's a bit more hostile. It's a bit more combustible. It's like now the moon is in the masculine, fiery Mars version. It's more of like that Aries god of war kind of vibe. Rather than something more covert, it's more explicit. So perhaps things are going to get more revealed and flushed out on some level, because now we're a bit more willing to be confrontational on some level. Even though I think the moon doesn't necessarily like to be in Aries, it's like, because this is mutual reception, it's like Mars maybe wants to hash things out, and the moon is like a bit more workable, and at some level there's a bit more of a collaboration going on. So yeah, I think like the moon is kind of moving into the last days as well before the new moon in Taurus. So it kind of feels like there's something that needs to get done on some level, which has that risk for impulsiveness, and also could bring up this like chance for missing something, or it's like we want to do something before we miss the chance to do something, right? It's like, okay, we only have so much time. It feels like the deadline's around the corner. And it's also kind of like, once the moon does move into Aries, it's like, okay, now we kind of game off that binge night of that whole Plutonian, Neptune, Taurus, Venus pleasure zone, hunger for the revenge kind of like darkness zone. And then the moon moves into Aries, and it's kind of like, okay, well, now it's time to wake up and get sober, get a reality check in a way. So it's kind of like, this is the moment where the 4 espresso shots we took the caffeine just like hits us, but rather than making things better, kind of just makes things a little bit worse. It's like, it's a bit too intense of a hit, right? All right, so that's kind of like it for Friday. So let's just move into Saturday. So right away in the morning, the moon is going to sextile with Mercury. Let's see if I can get like, yeah, it moves into an exact sextile with Mercury right in the middle of the night. And on some level, it's like, you know, with the moon still in this fiery Aries sign, it's still in this fiery sign of Aries, and then it sextiles with Mercury in the middle of the night. It's almost a bit like, okay, we drank the coffee too late in the afternoon yesterday, and now we can't sleep at all. And so now we're just staying up all night, texting with a million different people, maybe people from all over the world, maybe people we don't even know really that well, and kind of like pushing on how much we can get, how much stimulation can we get from our devices, from our conversations, from our impulsiveness with our technologies on some level. And it could be that we're like getting a bit too involved with people we barely even know, and just like seeing where that takes us, being a bit adventurous or a bit risk-taking with that. So it's like, it's kind of like, rather than being checked out the way that maybe some of us have been in the last little bit, or wanting to be, and like allowing ourselves to be a bit checked out, it's like now we're a little bit too checked in. The connection is like too good. And the moon is in this kind of funny place with this mutual reception to this debilitated Mars, and it's kind of getting ready for that perfecting of the square to Mars. So there's this like weird kind of collaboration between like, you know, our sensitivities and kind of our dreaminess, and like kind of this and wanting to emotionally connect and like have safety on some level, and then this kind of like wanting to prove ourselves and wanting to take risks and initiate things and be impulsive on some level. So Mercury, you know, is in Gemini now. And so it's kind of like the start of a bit of a delirious phase. But now we're kind of like getting our complex, we kind of are coming out of that, we're coming out of that delirious phase. And now we're kind of like getting this like complex of charm game back on. So maybe we're a bit more pushing the boundaries on our conversations is what I mean. Right. So moving this forward, let's just move forward to when the moon actually perfects the square with Mars. So the moon gets into that exact square with Mars early in the morning. So this is kind of like what we wake up to, especially if we didn't get a lot of sleep the night before. So it's not completely a terrible situation, but it is a bit concerning. Like I said, they have a mutual reception, so there's some mitigation, there's some collaboration between these two forces. But the moon is kind of like carrying over some of the vibes from the conversations we've been having. And now it's kind of like getting to this more like pushy kind of tyrannical zone. It's kind of like getting a bit of, and it's also like kind of like maybe we've been kind of totally stimulated and zoned out. Like maybe you were like, for instance, playing video games all night, and then suddenly you get like a slap in the face that like today at work, there's like a big project due or something like that. Or maybe you come into conflict with the office bully or something like that. And but in general, it could be like somebody's kind of upset right now with something that was done. Maybe there's some general kind of bullshit that you have to deal with, and you have to kind of tease it out. And people are kind of like done with that. They're kind of like done with any of the games being played. So it's like, no more jokes. Now let's get it together. You know, people are just a bit hypersensitive right now. And then like, I think with the mutual reception, it's like we're a bit too in touch with that sensitivity. Like I said, this is bringing up the stuff from the full moon, the Scorpio full moon. So it's like a bit hypersensitive right now. And it's really starting to show some of the flavors of what that hypersensitivity can mean in, you know, in a more like daily sense. So if you don't want to deal with those consequences, I think then it's best not to like, if you don't want to deal with the consequences of other people's problems, then it's best to like not make other people's problems your problem. And just because it feels like it's a good thing to do to get involved with, maybe you don't always have to, like, you don't always have to like make the situation your problem. Things are kind of coming together now, though, on some level. It's like, even though maybe there is that potential to fall and hit a pitfall and get confrontational, at the same time, it's like there is that energy there to get things moving. There's things to kind of force the pages to turn a bit. The new moon is really around the corner, so there really is only so much time to get shit done now. On some levels, it's like, since the last quarter moon, which I think was even today, Monday, May 3rd, it's like, even though there's the last quarter moon with that kind of feeling like, okay, well, there's that sense of urgency to get something done. It's like, now we're at that last like potential to finish. Maybe we set some intentions for ourselves for this lunar cycle, and it's like, this is like the last moments to do that. So, you got to do what you got to do. And if you don't have the time to do it, then just let go. Now it's kind of like that necessity phase. And then Mars is like, kind of like basically slapping us in the face and saying like, okay, if you want to do this, then you have to do it. You can't be, playing around anymore. And unfortunately, on some levels, it's like the vibe here is also a bit like, we want the results, but we don't want to do any of the work to get those results. But if we don't do the work, then there's no results. So that's kind of how I see it. All right. And then later in the day, Venus is actually moving into square with Jupiter exactly. So let's move it forward. Yeah. So in the afternoon, early mid-afternoon, Venus perfects that square with Jupiter. So it might be kind of like an afternoon where we take that last little bit of pleasure a little bit too far. It's Saturday night, or it's getting ready for Saturday night. Maybe we kind of like start our kind of, our enjoyment time a little early, and we want to take it all the way. Venus is in the last degrees of Taurus. Jupiter is also in the last degrees of Aquarius. So there is this potential for extremes. They're both at the analytic degree. And this is like, kind of like, we want to do something all for ourselves, but actually the idea is that, we're supposed to do it for everybody else too. It's not just about us. It's like principles before personalities in the situation. So it's like, okay, maybe we're not like the main characters in this plot. Maybe we're not the center of attention in this story. Maybe the subject matter is not us, right? And we need to kind of like share what we have within our limits too, right? So there's only so much we have, and there's only so much we actually need to share. There's only so much we can share. And so we kind of need to know what our limits are within that. So this has a little bit of a potential to like take things too far and go a little bit over the edge, but maybe that's okay for some people. And maybe it also means that if we take things too far, or like, let's say, you eat too much food, or, you overindulge, that's fine. But then you're going to have a stomach ache later. Maybe you'll have nightmares later. Maybe you're just going to have indigestion or something like that. Or maybe you'll just feel bad about yourself on some level. So feel free to binge, feel free to splurge. This is always also the Jupiter Venus square is often said like, this is a time where we just like splurge and spend money. So just be aware that you can do that. There's totally a freedom to do that, but that if you do, there will be consequences to those good things. Somehow it's like, somehow having fun isn't always free, right? There was always things that we have to pay in order to get things that we want to enjoy. So it's good in this situation to kind of know our limits already moving into this energy. This isn't like a bad thing, but it's like, especially because it's the two benefics actually meeting. They're making a proper degree-based aspect with one another. So this is actually kind of a pretty good thing. Jupiter is like the one who's in the superior position here. So there's this potentiality for progressing on some of the things that we want to get pleasure from in our lives. Maybe some sort of creative endeavor that we put some energy into, and to get some beneficence from that. But maybe we don't have to take it as far as we want to. Maybe it's like easy does it a little bit. It's kind of like if you drink 3 coffees after 6 p.m., you're not going to sleep. You're just not. Like, you're up all night. That's basically the end of the story. And like, there's a lot of good things happening right now, but it's also not happening for everybody too. Like maybe We might be getting a taste of good things, but we also have to be aware that not everybody is able to taste those things at the same time. So it's a good chance for us to show a little bit of sympathy and compassion for others. Maybe they're not getting the good that we're getting right now. For instance, like maybe parts of the world are opening up more, but other ones are still closing down a lot more. So it's kind of like, just because we're able to enjoy, the normal world again, doesn't mean that everybody else gets to. And so, maybe be mindful of that. So the only other really aspect that takes place on Saturday is the sextile that the moon makes to Pluto. But yeah, it's not really a big one. So, just be aware that maybe in the evening there is a bit more intensity going on. Like just making the situation with what I was talking about with the Venus Jupiter square a little bit more intense, a little bit more of we're just a bit more comfortable. Maybe we're a bit more comfortable with the fears that we're having. So just be aware of that. Oh no, it's a sextile with Saturn. So it just makes it's just a bit more of a seriousness to that situation. All right, so let's move on to Sunday, the last day of the week. So Sunday, May 9th. Really, like, not much goes on until Venus moves into Gemini in the middle of the night here in Germany. So Venus moves out of domicile in Taurus and into Gemini. So this shifts really the story of our relationships. This shifts the story of our pleasures. They go from something more tactile and into something more mental on some level, something more information-based, something more social. But what does that mean for our relationships at this time? Relationships may begin to show themselves more clearly. The communications in relationships may become more clear. We might start to take more clear roles in relationships as well. And there's just like a bit more of a lightness to what Venus is gaining while moving forward, especially as it's moving away from the sun. So now, like I said, there's that sign barrier between the sun and Venus. And even though Venus is technically still under the beams of the sun, there's that sign barrier, which kind of gives it some distance and is getting us ready for when Venus actually moves into the heliacal evening position where it will be seen again. We can actually see Venus in the night sky. And this is kind of like preparing us for these more Venus-like sympathies to emerge between our friendships, maybe our love relationships, beauty and art, pleasures, diplomacies, compromises, appetites, and overall kind of the story of our attractions and our disgusts and things like that. So Venus is also coming off that square from Jupiter, right? So knowing now that there are some limits to the things we can get pleasures out of, and there are limits to our kind of creative endeavors, to our relationships in general, it's now getting this taste of Gemini on some level. It's like, even though, we wanted to splurge and go all out, and maybe we kind of held our kind of selves back on some level, now that like Venus has moved into Gemini, it's kind of like that urge to be social is kind of like overcoming the desire to hold back. So I think it's also good to kind of think about the last time Venus was in Gemini, which was last year, and think about that time. And this was around when the lockdowns were starting and like really big changes were taking place in terms of our everyday affairs, where they went from maybe actually being in person somewhere to everything going online. And everything online actually increased. All these e-commerce shop businesses, just like their stocks went way up, and cryptocurrencies are starting to get more trending again, and all these kinds of shifts in how we're doing business in the everyday are changing. Like we were ordering groceries now, we're no longer going to the grocery store and things like that. So Venus basically just wants to have fun. And now the fun and pleasure is coming from somewhere mercurial, somewhere information-based, somewhere about stimulation, especially from technologies too. It's like once all the meetings we were doing went from like in person to to Zoom or whatever, maybe we'll be getting more pleasure from those kinds of online affairs. And it's also kind of like very much like tasting all the pleasures in the shop before actually coming to a conclusion on some level. It's like, wow, it all just tastes so good. It's that double-bodied, it's that mutable energy that's like tasting so good. Little bits are better than the whole dish. And it can be quite distracting, but we're going to be enjoying it anyway. And after Venus is leaving Taurus, it kind of has that taste. It knows what feels good. And now it's kind of like it's taking that social lubricant, especially from whatever kind of indulgences it made with Jupiter in that last transit. And it's kind of taking it on into our social lives and kind of making it a social lubricant of some level. So, it's kind of like, if you want to get the right amount, it's kind of like, when people kind of go out and maybe they take things a little bit too far, but maybe they hold themselves back and they know that like what's the right amount of drinking, or what's the right amount of getting wasted on some level, and they kind of use that to be the social lubricant they need in order to get a bit more of the pleasure they wanted out of the night. So yeah, and there's just a little bit of a potential for things to go too far in social situations right now. So just be aware of that, especially because it's in the middle of the night here in Berlin. So if you are going out, just be conscious of the fact that it could be one of those nights. So especially if you didn't really check yourselves. So let's move on from that. Sunday is basically like, that's kind of like the main thing on Sunday. Like the only other thing going on is this square from the moon to Pluto, but that doesn't even happen until the evening. So basically today, the whole Sunday is just this day to enjoy connecting, to stimulate ourselves, to socialize, to, feel good not being alone on some level. And being alone doesn't necessarily always just mean being with other people. It could be like maybe we get stimulation from going to lots of things online or something like that. So really, like I said, like the only other aspect on Sunday is the square to Pluto. So it could just be that now we're starting to feel the fear of eclipse season around the corner coming up. We're starting to get that kind of intensity of feeling that like maybe there's a bit of danger on the horizon. I think eclipse seasons are going to be a bit intense this year because that's going to be the Mercury retrograde. Saturn's also going to square with Uranus again when it goes retrograde as well. So this could be just a time when we start to see on the horizon some of the troubles that are coming, and there's a bit of fear going on. And being in the receptive position here with the moon, and it's getting ready for that new moon in Taurus. So it's kind of like, maybe we didn't get all the things we wanted to get done this lunar phase, and some of those are kind of important. And now we're realizing that on some level. So there is this kind of like danger on the horizon, and we're going to have to maybe like purge that fear before we can move forward, deal with it. We have to deal with it before we can move forward. So that's kind of it for the week. There's not really any transits happening until next week. So I'm going to stop the share here. We'll just close it up. But yeah, basically moving into next week, we have Mercury conjoining with the North Node. So it's just like high speed intensity communication, like think of like high speed internet. That's what it's going to be like. But look to your chart wherever you have Gemini, and that's going to be where things are really starting to amp up a bit. And then there's going to be the new moon in Taurus. But unfortunately, there's really no time to settle down here. There's just really no time at all. And that's really what I think that the moon squaring with Pluto is all about, is like we realize like we just don't really have any time to enjoy this right now. And so, yeah, and then Jupiter moves into Pisces next week, and we just get that taste of 2022. And yeah, I don't know about you guys, but like compared to last week, this week is just a bit more business as usual. And really next week and the week, the rest of May is where things start to get a bit more crazy. So yeah, that's kind of the week. I hope that you guys got something out of that. Thanks so much for always supporting and tuning in. If you want to leave a comment, I'd love to hear from you guys, what you guys are up to. And thanks so much for your support. As always, if you want to book a consultation with me, all the information is down below. If you're on Instagram, you can also DM me. So thanks so much always for tuning in. I wish you guys a good week. Enjoy those shifts in energy, and I'll see you next time. Bye.